All right, let's just dive right into this. We're looking at the dramatic and, frankly, mind-boggling transformation of the Safavids. I mean, this is the story of how a humble mountain mystic cult mutated into a militant global superpower that literally forged the modern Middle East. It's a completely staggering piece of history. We're talking towering ambition, absolute brilliance, and devastating tragedy. Welcome to today's Explainer.
Part 1, Forging a Shiite Empire, The Zealots' Rise.
So before this empire even existed, Persia was basically a shattered mosaic of warring tribes left over from the Mongol invasions. But out of this quiet little town called Ardabil came these absolutely fanatical warriors. They were known as the Qizilbash, or Redheads, and they got that name from their crimson headgear. It actually had 12 folds to represent the 12 imams of Shia Islam. Now, these fierce Turkoman tribesmen didn't just, respect their leader. They honestly believed he was a living god, a divine shadow on earth. They blindly followed a charismatic 14-year-old boy king named Ismail into battle with this reckless courage, totally convinced he would magically protect them. And it kind of worked. Ismail marched on Tabriz in 1501, crowned himself king of kings, and did something incredibly audacious. He forced a Sunni-majority population to convert to Twelver Shi'ism by the sword. He literally commanded that Sunni caliphs be cursed in the streets, and those who refused to convert faced death. This teenage boy king went on a conquering spree that was so fierce, sweeping all the way from the Caucasus down to the Persian Gulf, that he even defeated a major Uzbek rival and, get this, had his skull turned into a gold-encrusted drinking goblet. Yeah, for a fleeting moment, Ismail and his Qizilbash seemed completely invincible.
Part 2, Gunpowder and Consolidation, the Reality of Warfare.
But Ismail's invincible aura was about to shatter against a very modern, mortal threat. At the catastrophic Battle of Chaldiran in 1514, fanaticism collided head-on with modern technology. The neighboring Ottoman Sultan saw Ismail as a heretic and marched eastward. Now, picture this. On one side you have the Safavid Qizilbash, superb horsemen, sure, but relying entirely on religious fervor, charging in with swords and bows. On the other side, the Ottoman military, highly disciplined regiments of janissaries armed with matchlock muskets and heavy cannons set up behind chained barricades. It was a bloodbath. The cannons just tore through the Qizilbash ranks. Ismail barely escaped with his life, leaving his people with a profound psychological trauma. The illusion was broken. They realized right then and there they had to modernize or die.
To actually save the empire, Ismail's son, Tahmasp I, who by the way went on to rule for an incredible 54 years, he completely abandoned his father's reckless zealotry for sheer cold pragmatism. He recognized their border was way too vulnerable, so he packed up and moved the capital inland to Qazvin. And when the Ottomans invaded under Sulayman the Magnificent, Tahmasp didn't charge out to meet them. Instead, he employed brutal scorched earth tactics. He just retreated, leaving absolutely nothing behind, effectively choking out the massive invading Ottoman supply lines until they had no choice but to turn back. This brilliant, stubborn pragmatism eventually secured the 1555 Peace of Amasya, saving the whole shebang from total destruction.
Part 3, The Golden Age, The Architects of Empire.
Fast forward a bit to 1588. The empire is crumbling again, until a ruthless 16-year-old named Abbas the Great seizes the throne. Abbas looked at his fractured kingdom, plagued by weak successors and rebellious chieftains, and knew he had to entirely remake the state from the ground up to survive. So he executes a brilliant three-pronged strategy. Step 1, systematically dismantle the power of those unruly Qizilbash tribes who originally started the empire. Step 2, replace them with gulams. This was a fiercely loyal standing army of military slaves captured from the Caucasus, completely armed with modern muskets and artillery. It was basically a hard pivot to a modern centralized military. And Step 3, pacify the Persian Gulf and completely monopolize the global silk trade to flood his treasury with European silver. And he poured that immense new wealth into a breathtaking transformation of his new capital, Isfahan, in 1598. He built the Naqsh Jahan Square, which is still one of the largest public squares on Earth today, flanked by these soaring turquoise domes, palaces, and a grand imperial bazaar. It was so magnificent that people coined the phrase Isfahan Nesfa Jahan, meaning Isfahan is half the world. To really grasp the scale here, imagine a 17th century global trade network stretching seamlessly from Amsterdam all the way out to Manila, orchestrated right from this very city by Christian Armenian merchants whom Abbasad strategically relocated just to drive this massive global economic boom.
Part 4, Decay from Within,
The shadows of the harem.
But here is the wild part. The architect of this dazzling golden age was actually hiding a dark, consuming paranoia. Having taken the throne by rebelling against his own father, Abbas lived in absolute terror that his sons would do the exact same thing to him. Tragically, this led him to systematically destroy his own bloodline. He murdered his highly capable eldest son and blinded the others. Before Abbas, royal princes were sent out to the provinces to be trained by veteran generals in warfare and statecraft. But fearing they would build up rival armies, he decreed that all royal princes must be locked away in the royal harem. Think about the consequences of that. He doomed future heirs to be educated exclusively by eunuchs and concubines. He effectively condemned the empire to a century of inept, sheltered, and deeply paranoid rulers who had absolutely no idea how to govern the massive state he had built.
So without a strong Shah at the helm to maintain control, the highly centralized system just began to rot. To make matters worse, the global silk trade declined, which triggered a severe economic crisis and massive inflation. It created this huge power vacuum. And with no strong king in charge, fiercely dogmatic clerics, known as the ulama, stepped right in to run the state, grabbing unprecedented political power as the monarchy faded in the late 17th century.
This handed the reins over to hardline clerics like Majlisi, who instituted catastrophic policies that completely dismantled the strategic tolerance that had previously kept this massive, multi-ethnic empire together. He outlawed philosophy, banned mysticism, and forced the conversions of Jews, Zoroastrians, and Christians. But the absolute most fatal error? The vicious persecution of the Sunni Muslims living on the empire's borders, specifically the Kurds and the Afghans. They violently alienated the exact people who were supposed to be guarding their frontiers.
Part 5. Fall and Enduring Legacy. The Afghan Storm.
That brutal alienation of the borders finally sparked a fire that would burn the whole empire to the ground. Out in Kandahar, Sunni Pashtun tribes rebelled against the heavy taxation and religious persecution, eventually just declaring independence. And while the Safavid Shah at the time, Sultan Hussein, hid in his harem, passively agreeing to whatever his clerics told him, the storm approached. Now, this is absolutely staggering. In 1722, a tiny force of just 20,000 rugged, battle-hardened Afghan warriors marched right across the harsh deserts of central Iran and completely routed the massive imperial Safavid army. At the Battle of Gulnabad, the decaying, divided Safavid military just collapsed, forcing the survivors to flee behind the towering walls of Isfahan.
What followed was easily one of the most horrifying sieges in human history. The Afghans didn't even have siege equipment. They just surrounded the grand metropolis and waited. For 8 agonizing months, the city slowly starved to death. Its beautiful gardens were stripped bare. Citizens resorted to eating horses, then dogs and cats, and finally desperately moved onto leather, bark, and tragically, human flesh. The streets filled with unburied corpses and rampant disease. Finally, a broken Shah Sultan Hussein rode out of his starving capital, literally surrendered his crown, and placed it on the head of the Afghan rebel.
Despite this chaotic, brutal fall, the 221-year Safavid rule forged a massive, undeniable legacy. Geographically, they locked in the permanent borders of the Iranian plateau. Religiously, Ismail's audacious imposition of 12-verse Shi'ism permanently separated Iran from its Sunni neighbors. Honestly, if you want to understand the geopolitical stance of modern Iran today, it was quite literally forged right here by the Safavids. And culturally, their breathtaking synthesis of Persian and Islamic art and architecture continues to influence the globe even today.
Please like and subscribe.